So Lindsay, I'm glad to be on Team Lindsay. I'd like to start with that and introduce myself to the group. My name's Yusef Muhammad. I'm from Houston, Texas, and I've been an Interrise instructor for the Emerging Leaders Program for 6 years. So in Houston, I teach two cohorts, and as well as being an ISC, instructor support coach. As a business owner for over 23 years, owning a number of companies in my portfolio, primarily in business and media, I can relate to you guys as business owners. But what qualifies me to be a guest expert on this call is my personal success and my expertise that I have demonstrated in helping companies scale. I like to say that I do this every day. This is not theory. For me, this is actual practical application as far as helping companies and showing the impact. And one of the ways that I do that for the past 15 years, I volunteered as a business advisor with SCORE. SCORE is the nation's largest network of business advisors with over 10,000 counselors and 300 offices throughout the country. And as a resource partner of the SBA, we're known as Counselors to America's Small Business. And in Houston, I'm the chapter chair and president, where I lead a team of 160 advisors with 16 offices, and we have 60 education sites. And in Houston, we're one of the largest chapters in the country. So my area of expertise is advising borrowers and lenders on SBA lending products. So lastly, as a professional consultant, our firm helps borrowers access capital and entrepreneurs gain equity investment from investors. So that's a little about me. And I'd like to kind of start our talk the same way we would start an emerging leader session. We always start with learning objectives, and today I want to take a look at the facts. I want to do a financial assessment and then talk about how others view your financial picture. Want to talk about traditional lending models and reasons for rejection, as well as alternative lending models. And kind of before I get started, I want to let you know, just to start off with, that I have some good news and bad news. The good news is I have a lot of information to discuss. The bad news is I only have 45 minutes to have the entire discussion, with like 15 minutes to do a presentation that normally takes an hour to deliver. So I'm gonna try to get through as much of this information as I possibly can, and hopefully we can have a meaningful Q&A where we can really kind of dive deeper into some of the discussions, and I get to know your story and your business, and hopefully I'm able to answer your questions as we go along. As in session 0, when you complete session 0, one of the first things you do going into session 1, you do a business assessment. Well, we're going to do a financial assessment. And one of the ways that I like to do the exercise of the assessment is not necessarily to put anyone on the spot and have you answer any particular questions. It's more for you to reflect on some of the questions and what your answers to the questions may be, and hopefully help you if there is a question that you don't have a good answer for, or it's an area in where you're weak. Hopefully together as a group, peer to peer, we can give you some aha moments, some takeaways that you can use as you develop your plan and strategy on how to move forward. So I thought about, how can I best, in a short period of time, recreate the business assessment, which normally takes a lot of time for each individual to do. I said, well, the best way to do it, and I think all students in classrooms across the country love it when they get a quiz. So we're going to start with the quiz. And this quiz is, again, it's more to help you reflect on the answers and not necessarily put anyone on the spot. All right. So one of the first questions that I like to pose is, are you solvent? And some people, I speak to groups across the country all the time, and whenever I ask this question, there's maybe 95% of the people in the room who don't even know the meaning of the word. And that's okay. If you don't know the meaning, or if once I tell you the definition, you remember what the answer is. But it's more I want us to take a look at, as we're looking at our financial picture, because this first question, are you solvent? It answers a lot of questions, and primarily it will answer, your answer to this question could determine if you survive the recovery or become a victim of it. So, are you solvent? Do you have more assets than you do liabilities? That's the definition. Does your assets outweigh your liabilities? Who do you owe? And what do you own? And how much of your assets are in cash, and how much of your assets are fixed? As you can recall, when we went through the financial module in the Emerging Leaders program, we talked about our balance sheets. And if you can recall, in the balance sheets, obviously your assets, the most liquid, are at the top, and it always represents cash. Running a large organization like I do, with over 160 people, it's nearly impossible to run an organization effectively if you don't have cash in the bank, if you're not able to pay your bills. And when you look at how solvent you are, or your cash position, or if you're liquid during this time, that again answers the question, can you survive what we're going through? And I understand a lot of people got the PPP loans, but that's really to help from an employment perspective, puts a Band-Aid on things for 2 months. But do we have enough cash to weather the storm? And one of the things that we know in America, we like stability and we like control. And right now, there's no stability, and it's very difficult to say we have control over what's going on, because we don't have any control. And some experts are saying it's going to take 18 months before things recover or get back to normal, or that we even come up with a vaccine. And once you come up with that vaccine, hopefully it will make us feel stable and have some sort of control. But 54% of Americans still feel that it's unsafe to venture out. It's unsafe to, go and visit restaurants and malls and all of that. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the country. And when you look at the basics of business, business is supply and demand. If there's no demand, how can you fill that void, as far as how can you supply something that's gone away? So there's a lot of a lot of companies who may not survive because the demand has gone away. So again, answering that question, are you solvent? Going back to how much cash do you actually have in the bank? And if you have the cash flow, because at the end of the day, the solvency issue, it tells us if we're able to pay our current debts and pay our bills and our employees for the future. And again, I like to bring up dusting off, if you will, on a side note, our financials, our financial statements, and ask you the question again, since this is a quiz and I'm having you to kind of think about if you have these things in place or you recall them from your session and being in class. But right now, especially since we're at home, we're having an opportunity to reassess where we are and the tools that we were given through the Enterprise program to help us plan our next step. So I bring up the financial statements because I want to know how many of you actually get complete financial reports on your business at least every month. And do you understand what all those numbers mean? And if you ask your accountant to explain what the numbers mean, can you make sense of what he or she is telling you? And most importantly, are you using that information in those reports to help you make smart decisions about your business? So these, again, are questions that I like to pose to make you think about where you stand and the health and your financial position of your company. All right. One of the next things on the quiz is, what's your debt to income ratio? Do you even know? Do you know how to calculate it? Do you look at those things? And what does it tell us? It tells us the strength of our buying power, or if we're over leveraged. As you know, in a situation when you're talking about cash and solvency and what are fixed assets that you'd have to literally go out of business to convert into cash, again, going back to our balance sheets and looking at even our accounts receivables, right now, we may have a lot of invoices out, but how many of those invoices are being held up? How many contracts did we have that are not going through because everything is on hold? What do we do? Do we have access to credit to be able to help us at this time? Access to credit and being able to understand your debt to income ratio and how to use these tools, indicators, to keep us aware of the health of our company is important at this time. Again, if you look at the debt to income ratio, if you're going out for a FHA home loan, let's take it personal. You know, some underwriters will say you need to be at 30% or 40%. But the higher your debt to income ratio, the less access you have to credit. The higher your credit utilization, the lower your scores are. And when you talk about your credit scores from the different credit bureaus and the FICO scoring and how the FICO scoring is weighted from payment history to credit utilization, you know, if your debt is higher, it reduces your scores. So at this time, when we're talking about our financial picture, we have to bring in to the conversation what our credit looks like. What do we have to do to repair our credit or address some things in our credit history? Because in order to survive and move through this recovery, we need to be able to almost cut our spending, look at our costs, our core operating costs, and make the plans necessary to help us survive through this, as we may have to shift or adjust our business model. So again, I like to always talk about how others view your financial picture, in particular lenders and investors. Because if we look at some of the things that they look at, it helps us to determine what we need to prepare, what we need to do to position our companies to where we need to be in order to be creditworthy or bankable or solvent. And so one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how others see your financials or your financial picture. Number 3, what's your current ratio? What's your quick ratio? This is straight out of the Enterprise financial module. Obviously, your quick ratio, and this is just a recap, it's an acid test for estimating at a glance whether your company is facing immediate liquidity problems. Again, we're trying to measure your company's capacity to pay its debt as they become due. That's why I like to always bring up the question first of solvency and access to credit when talking about your financial picture and where you stand and what do you have to do to strengthen your position in order to weather a storm. And I like to say also in Houston, in Texas, we're experts at weathering a storm because Texas we lead the country in natural disasters. Since 1953, we've had over 352 federally declared natural disasters, and that's 51 more than California. I've been in business for over 23 years, so to succeed and to survive, first and foremost, succeed and thrive in an environment where every 9 months we're having a natural disaster, a federal natural. I know a little about how to take a look at our business model and make the adjustments necessary in understanding supply and demand and how to keep our company positioned to where we can have access to credit, how we can keep enough cash in the bank, not for 3 months, not for 6 months, but for a year or a year and a half even, because you never know how long, when you're hit with a Hurricane Harvey. I want to share a story with you with one of the natural disasters out of many. In 2002, I think it was Hurricane Rita that came through Houston. And at the time, our office, we were in an office park. We were on the 2nd floor. We took over a bank suite. It was a beautiful office. It was really nice. And then the hurricane came and it wiped out our office park. The water came up to the 2nd floor of our office building. They only allowed us to go in with the insurance adjuster to see, to do the assessment from an insurance perspective to determine what was lost and all of that. I was only able to go in that one day. We were barred from entering the building for 6 months after that, but I still had employees, I had clients, I had to fulfill obligations. We're a national company, so we were still conducting business outside of the city, and they weren't affected by the natural disaster. We were, so our clients and customers still expected us to operate as normal. And we had to take a hard look at how do we continue to operate in an environment where we're no longer in our office, we don't have access to our equipment, we still have to meet deadlines, we still have to perform at a level at which our customers have come accustomed to, which are some of the same questions that everyone is having to answer right now. To me, this is a Hurricane Harvey across the country, and everyone's having to ask the same question and look at their business models. And again, that's why I like to pose this quiz or these questions kind of to make you think, because we all now have to have these conversations and sharing our experiences and asking some of the questions to those of us who've gone through some disasters. How did we react? And how did we overcome? How have we been able to remain in business for over 23 years and we constantly have these natural disasters? So one of the ways that we do that is, we're going to do that in this discussion, is take a look at how others view your financials, because I think you can learn a lot in that. And I want to stay mindful of my time. So Lindsay, if I start to go a little long, maybe nod, because I can see you, and I'll cut it short. So what we're going to do, just for the sake of time, I'm going to go to my next slide, because one of the things that I talk to my clients at SCORE and at our consulting firm, I actually personally consult maybe 250 companies a year outside of what I do with Interrise. So I have an opportunity to talk to companies, whether they're making millions of dollars a year or they're a startup. So I get an opportunity to learn from a lot of people, whether it's a client or whether it's those in our organization who have an expertise in different industries. And one of the things that I like to focus on is how to make your business bankable and how others see your financial position, because in that, again, I think you can strengthen, you can learn a lot of lessons on how to strengthen your company. So with that being said, how to make your business bankable, and is your business currently bankable? In a traditional lending model, which what we're looking at now, there's two qualifications that are required to be considered bankable. The owner must qualify as a guarantor, and the business must qualify as viable. You, again, as a guarantor, you come into the picture. Your debt to income ratio comes in the picture. Your solvency comes into the picture, and your business comes into the picture to determine, is it actually a viable business? And in this climate where demand is down, you almost have to ask yourself, am I still viable in a climate where the demand is down? And if I'm not viable based on our traditional business model, what do we do at our core that we could focus on to make us become viable, or to increase an opportunity where there's an opportunity to increase revenue or explore and grow a particular product line or service line? And that's what we were able to do after that natural disaster, not being in our offices and not being able to come together as a group. We focused on the thing, one, that we had the highest profit margin, but we were able to do remotely, and that turned into the business model for us that took us over the top, and we became really successful early. But again, looking at this traditional business model, as you can see under the blue, it says you must have all three to become considered bankable: cash flow, credit, and collateral. Cash flow, the weight on these particular categories is 50%. Credit is 40%. Collateral, 10%. This is in a traditional banking model. The owner's personal credit score, 700 FICO plus. Operating history, 3 years plus. Debt service coverage is 1.25. Your global cash flow, meaning all of the revenue combined from business and personal. The documentation that's needed, from business plan to quarterly business reports, personal financial statements, IRS documentation. A lot of this documentation you were able to see upfront, close and personal if you applied for the PPP loans. Because applying for the PPP loans, even though the SBA waived the eligibility test, meaning you couldn't get credit elsewhere, which is normally a criteria. They didn't look at your credit. They didn't look at your collateral. There was just a lot of things that they weighed during this for the eligibility test that allowed for a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily get the loan in the past. It allowed them to be able to get this access to capital through this stimulus now. But even with that being said, you still had to have certain documentation. Meaning, if you were an LLC, you had to have your articles of incorporation, your certificate of filing, your EIN, your operating agreement, your bylaws, and a lot of companies didn't even know what that was. Again, I consult the banks, and we've taken over 4,000 requests for PPP loans, and we helped a lot of companies get access to capital through the PPP loans. And a lot of the companies, you could tell they didn't have a relationship with their accountants or CPAs. And it showed because they weren't familiar with the documents that were needed, from Schedule Cs to 940s and 941s, and which was needed in order to calculate what your loan would be from the PPP standpoint. And that's why I bring this up in the discussion, because these are things that we have to be aware of as business owners. We have to be organized and be able to get our hands on these documents, be aware of these documents, but this should be a part of us operating our business. And it shows the deficiencies in our business if we don't have these things together. Now we have to establish that relationship with our business advisor or accountant or CPA, so we understand what the documents are and what they're used for as it relates to getting a loan and operating your business for that matter. And I have 20 minutes. Am I running short, Lindsay?
I think maybe if maybe one more point, but I'd love to open it up to the discussion if we can, because we're only running until 1 today.
Okay. Yeah, because I'd like to hear the feedback as well and questions as well. So the next slide, I was going to talk about some of the reasons that the lenders would reject you, but I'd like to open up that discussion, if you don't mind. That way we can I can incorporate some of the discussion points in the question and answer portion of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's stop sharing the screen for a moment, and I will stop the recording so that we can keep our Q&A between all of us.